Okay, I think we are all here. Welcome everyone. We are so excited to have you here. My name is Riggs Kay, and today we're going to talk about texture animation and making particles in our new creator tool, IMVU Studio. And then we will be answering your questions via our Q&A feature. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions, and remember to keep your questions on topic and GA friendly. If you haven't downloaded the latest IMVU Studio product, let me give you a link here. Very exciting. And you can also, sorry, just trying to find the chat here. You can also find our previous IMVU Studio session recordings there in case you missed the ones that we've done before. And those are very useful. Each learning section is on a different topic. So it's a really good idea to view all of the learning sessions to get the most out of IMVU Studio. Speaking of recordings, we will be recording this session so that people who might have missed the session can listen to it later. And even if you attend this session, it's really useful to go back and stop and start the learning session just to get a little bit more out of it. All right, now let's introduce our experts, Tonik and Drosselmeyer. Drosselmeyer is our technical artist here at IMVU Studio. He's going to be showing you texture animations. And hey Drosselmeyer.
Hey, hi everyone.
And Tonik, who is in charge of everything IMVU Studio, is going to be showing you about particles. Hey, Ton.
Good morning or afternoon, everybody. Really glad to be here.
Yeah. All right. So, there we have some noise in the background. That's always fun here in our home offices. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and take it away, Drosselmeyer.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Let me get the screen going here. You're going to have to stop sharing, Riggs Kay. Oh, I guess I can do it. Never mind.
You have the power.
I have the power. Okay, here we go. So, hi everyone. I'm going to show you a simple but powerful feature of IMVU Studio that will add life to your product using our textures. This was a feature that was in the classic client as well. It's texture animation. Let me start by showing you scrolling. There are actually two forms. Hang on, there's two forms of texture animation. One is scrolling and the other is cycling, but we'll start with scrolling. Here's an example of, wait, why is it doing that? Yeah. Oh, I see. My zoom controls are interfering with what I want to click on. Okay, let's get rid of this. Okay, so here's an example of scrolling. This is something I whipped up pretty quickly, but the common and traditional use for scrolling is for water texture. So I just have a texture that's scrolling along the y-axis, and it gives this nice waterfall effect. Scrolling can be found, I should tell you that the controls for texture animation can be found here. Let me show you. So if you go to Components, Material, click on your texture, and down over here there's a texture animation switch, and that opens up the texture animation controls. But for this demo, what I'm going to do is I've got a sample file that'll help explain in more detail what's going on here. So what we have is when you open up the texture animation controls, you have a few controls here. The mode, we're going to show scrolling first. The frames, which controls the update of the animation, so the rate, and that rate is based on 30 frames a second. The offset, which we'll get to, and direction. Clear that. And so the frames per cell is, as I mentioned, the update. Right now I've got it set to 5. If I set this to 30, if it's based on 30 frames a second, it's going to basically do an update once per second. So you see it's going once per second. If I change this to 15, it'll be once every half second. And then the fastest you could go is one update per frame. And that's like a 30th of a second. I'm gonna stick with 10 for now. Direction controls how many pixels the texture will move each update. Right now, it's moving 10 pixels in the in the X direction, sort of along this axis. If I was to say put 10 in here, which I will do in a minute, it will move up this way. You can also enter a negative number to reverse it. So let's put a negative number in here. And it should go the other way. Yep. And if I change this to 10, that'll have it scroll up. The last control, oops. The last control is the offset. And this does pretty much what you'd expect. It shifts the texture in either the X or Y direction, but it only does it once. It doesn't do it once per frame. So if I put, say, 10 in here, it just scooches the whole texture up a little bit. So you can see now part of the top is wrapping around onto the bottom. And that's scrolling. The next thing I want to show you is cycling. Oops. And cycling has some of the same controls as scrolling, but a few extra controls. And cycling you can think of as basically a flipbook animation. And here's some examples of that. So I made this marquee, and the lights are doing the marquee lights through cycling. And then I'll show you using a demo cube here how that works. It's got a few fields here that we want to look at. Let's see. So let's go back to flipbook. So it's a flipbook animation. What does that mean? It uses a series of images called cells. So each one of these it's a series of images. So we've got a series of images here, and each one of these is considered a cell. So that's a cell. That's a cell. And the sequence order for playing this flipbook animation is left to right and top to bottom. So it'll go first row, second row, third row, fourth row, and so on. And the fields that are unique to, or the controls that are unique to cell animation are the number of cells, the start cell, and the cell size. So in this example, we've got this is a 256 by 256 image. So each one of these cells is going to be 64 by 64. Let me go ahead and update this because it's currently set to 32 by 32, and you'll see what I mean by this. So there, 32 by 32, you're only getting a section of the cell. So let's fix that. Set this to 64. Preview it. Now I've got one cell. Now it's not animating yet, and that's because we haven't set the start cell and the number of cells. It's actually number of cells is 1, so it's only playing one cell right now at a time, which is this cell right here, because this start cell is 0. So let's give it a range. Set the cell numbers to 4. And now it's playing through this first row of sequences. Okay. The reason why this is useful, the number of cells is start cells, is because you can do something like this, where you have a few different textures or a few different materials. So we've got a top material, a right side material, and a front material. So the top is here, the right is here, the front is here, and they correspond to these sequences here. That one, that one, and that one. And then I'll just show you kind of where that works. So top is set obviously from 0 to 4. So that's going from 0, 4 frames. 1, 2, 3, 4. But if I look at the front one, this one is set to, number of frames is 4, but the start cell is 12, which means it's starting on this frame here and marching 4 frames. And that's why you see this. Okay. So the other thing that's interesting is for cell animation or for cycling, the offset works a little differently. If I put in a value here of say 10, it shifts the image up kind of as you'd expect. So now you're getting a little bit of the green here, and the top of the red is getting cut off. However, X works a little differently. I'll show you how that works. So X actually offsets the animation sequence. And so what you need to do is set this back to 0. It offsets the sequence. So let's say if I put this to 10, weird things will happen. I'll show you here. It's doing some funky things. So what you need to do is you need to set this to a value that matches your cell size. So when you're doing cycling, you got to match the offset to the cell size. So now what it's doing is it's running from here to here. The last couple things I wanted to show you are just sort of some gotchas that might make it tricky to use cycling. And one is that the sequence does not wrap around, meaning that if you set a range of, say, let's start from 14 and come around and go 4 cells. So you'd think that if you set the start range or your start cell to 14 and go 4 cells, that it would wrap around, but it doesn't. I'll show you that. So let's say, let's fit this start cell 14. So what's happening, the start cell is 14. And actually, let's make it 12. We'll clear what's going on. So now what's happening, oh wait, hang on. Start cell 13. This is live television, folks. Oh, I've got an offset. It's clearly offset. There we go. Okay. 14. Okay, so here's what's going on. I removed my offset, so that's not interfering with this, but I set the start cell to 14, and like I was saying, you'd expect that if it's going 4 cells, it should at least wrap around. It should go 14, 15, 0, 1, but it actually doesn't. It only goes 14, 15, and then stops. Um, the very last thing I want to show you is that the cell size, so when you set your cell size, this will affect the total number of cells. And what I mean by that is if you change your cell size to be, say, 64 or 128 by 64, this becomes cell 0, 1, 2, and 3. And I'll show you that. So if we set our number of cells to 4, start cell with 0, and then set the cell size to be 128, which would be twice the width. Now you see that it's actually looping from here, 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 and then back again. And that's about it. That's texture animation. Back to you, Riggs K.
Oh, thank you so much. Now we have Tonic, who's going to show us about particles. I'm very excited about this one.
Hey folks, how's everybody doing? That was a great demo, Drosselmeyer. Just a quick point on that. Cell animation is not exclusively a feature of IMVU Studio. It exists in the old client as well, and we've brought it over to IMVU Studio just for compatibility. But hopefully the layout's a little bit easier, and with the tooltips and especially the tutorial that Greg has given you, you can explore what you can do with cell animations a little more.
Yeah, and we've got a whole bunch of tutorials that we're revamping all of our tutorials, and this is definitely one that's going to get in the mix, and we'll get that one to you as well.
Great. So what I came here today to show everyone in the latest version, 3.5.1, which I think was released a couple days ago, we released our particle system 2.0 to the general public. Now, just a few words on that. There is a particle system in the old classic client. Some of you may know this and some of you may not, but the particle system in the old client was never actually officially released. And that's why you never were able to have a user interface along with the particle system. It was just never built. So in addition to the new particle system having new features, it's also exclusive to IMVU Studio and the Next products. Particle systems that you make in IMVU Studio will not show up in the classic client. So just a quick disclaimer there up front. But we have new features, and the system works better, and it's much more efficient, and it's got a really nice shiny UI. And I just realized I was not sharing my screen. Let me do that.
Live television.
Yeah, live television. Just as an example, I'm going to show you a few examples of some particle systems that I made in the last few days. And then what I'd like to do is I'd like to go through, in the time that we have, all of the parameters and how they affect a particle system. So this should at least get you started. It will at least get you to the point where you can feel comfortable experimenting with particle systems and hopefully start adding them to your products. What I did here, which is much better if I start up a little animation. Let me start that one up. I have a very kind of generic particle system with some color effects, some fade outs. I have the particle system changing in size and color over time. And the particle system is also in world space. So as her hands are moving around in the dance, the particles are staying in world space and not following her around. If you were to try to do this in the old classic client particle system, it only exists in local space, and so what you would actually end up seeing is something like this. Just to give you an example of the particle system on her left hand is the one that's in local space. The one in her right hand is actually in world space. So that's the difference. Particles can trail objects that are moving now, which is much more dynamic and much more realistic. But to get started here, I just have a product that I've derived from. This is just a shirt or a top product. And no matter what product you derive from, you can add a particle system to it. The particle system that you add will, at least for right now, until we come out with a future version, hopefully in the next release, the particle system is always going to be attached to the root node of the product. In the case of these fairy sparkles that I made, the product that I derived from was actually an accessory wrist product. So these particle systems are spawning from the root of this object that I derived from, and that's how I was able to get it to attach to her hands. But for this case, very, very simply, we're just going to use this shirt product. The way that you add a particle system is just go down to your new particle component setting over on the left here, and click on plus. And what that will do is it will create a new particle component. We can rename this. I'll just rename it something really boring. And what it also does is it's going to create a new material as well. So if I go back up to my material component, you'll notice that there's a new material that's been created. Now, if I just press preview, it will automatically just start spawning a particle system with all of the default settings. But what I'm going to do for this case is I'm going to go back over to this particle, and I'm just going to add, for the purposes of the demonstration, an opacity map here with an arrow, so that you can see sort of the direction that the particle systems are pointing when they're spawning. It'll be better for example here. So I'm going to go back over to the particle system, and just so that we can see it a little more clearly, and I'll get back to this setting in a moment. But I'm actually just going to make the beginning and end life of the particle opaque, just so that we can see those particles a little bit better. There we go. That's better. So starting up at the top, you have a whole section here called emission. And what this means is it's the state of a single particle when it gets spawned and when it's emitted. There's an initially enabled, which at this point you're going to always want this on. If you turn it off, the particle system won't be on. You have your simulation, whether it be in local space or world space, and I showed you an example of that. There's an initial delay in seconds. So if I were to preview this, the particle system waits 2 seconds and then it starts emitting. That's basically what that means.
Nice arrows.
Yeah, thank you. There's also the rate, and the rate is the number of particles that are spawned per second. So if I increase this value to, let's say, 50, it's going to spawn about 50 particles every second, right? So there we go. Now we got a lot of particles going. There's the lifetime. So this is over the life of a single particle, how long it stays in existence in seconds. And you have a minimum and maximum here. So the system will choose a range in between your minimum and maximum. So if I want my particles to exist from, let's say, 1 to 3 seconds, it will be random for each particle submitted. So let's take a look at that. So notice some of the particles are disappearing in the air after 1 second. Some particles are existing a full 3 seconds. Let's go a little lower, and let's just say 0.5 to 0.6 seconds. Now you notice the particles are sort of disappearing very quickly. Let's bring this back up. Just, oops. For our example here. So the next setting is the speed. So this is the when the particle comes into existence, you can tell it to be going at a specific speed, and that's in meters per second. So if I were to increase this, let's say, and this is also a minimum, maximum as well. So you can have your particles be spawning at different speeds. So notice now that they're spawning much faster, right? If I were to make the speed exactly the same, you can actually notice the difference here. Notice all of the particles are going exactly the same speed. But if I add a range, now the particles look a little more random because some of them are moving really fast and some of them are moving a little bit more slowly, right? The next item is rotation, and this is a random rotation applied to the material at the point that it is comes into existence. So right now we have negative 360 to 360. So all of the particles are going to be generated in random directions. And that's why I set up the arrow there for you so you could see an example of that. If I were to change this to 0, 0 and press preview, notice all of the particles are emitting with a material in a single direction. If I change that rotation, let's say negative 20 to 20, notice now all the particles have a slight rotation, but they're between negative 20 degrees and 20 degrees, right? 0 degrees being straight up. The size of the particle system. The particle system is, the basis is in meters. And so if I want to have very, very tiny particles, I can actually go down to, let's say, 0.1 meter to 0.3 meters. And again, this is a minimum and maximum. And so the particles will be generated randomly between these two values. So in fact, just to give you a better example, let's go from 0.1 to 0.9. That way you'll see the particles in different sizes. There we go. So now you have some big particles. Maybe make that a little bigger. Let's just say 0.5. That way you'll have some tiny particles and some much bigger particles. There we go. Fun. Greg, please stop me if I go down a rabbit hole, but this is so much fun to play with. Sometimes I just start entering values and just seeing what happens. And I forget that I'm live.
Okay, I'll see what I can do.
I have to say the arrows are hypnotizing me.
They're kind of hypnotizing, aren't they? I know. Greg actually made that arrow for me, so thanks, Greg. It made it much easier.
Yeah, it took so long to make. Can you make them do the fish thing?
I can, and I'll get there. Patience.
Okay.
So the maximum count. Now, one thing about the maximum count is it is related to the rate. We have a maximum count. So this is the maximum number of particles that can exist per particle component. I can't go 301, but I can go 300. So those are the maximum number of particles that can exist. My particle rate, my emission rate, can't be higher than my max count rate. So if I were to make my max count 100, I can't make my initial, I don't want 100 seconds of initial delay. I can't make my rate higher. Notice it just defaults back. And that's just so that we don't get any errors in the system. But if I were to make my max count rate 300 and then maybe bump this rate up to 150, we're going to see a lot of particles spawning. Woohoo! There we go. And the system will try to keep the max count to 300. So it will throttle the rate to keep your maximum count to 300. You can, if you see particles starting to disappear, one really good tip is to adjust the lifetime of your particle system. For an example like this, which is sort of a fountain effect, notice that I have a lot of particles that are actually falling through the floor that you can't see. And if I wanted this effect, I could actually make my lifetime a little bit less and still get the same effect. And I could have more particles on the screen at the same time. Like if I were to make this from 2 to 3 seconds. Now I'm sort of utilizing the full effect because as the particles come back down to the ground, oh, well, I still have a little bit more falling off. Let's, oh, I changed the speed. Someone tell me what I'm changing here. Let's say, let's do this.
You're changing the speed.
Now I'm, yeah.
Too late.
Now I'm changing the lifetime, and notice the particles are disappearing before they come back down. So you can adjust the lifetime so that you're not trying to render particles that are disappeared through the floor. I guess that's a long-winded way of what I was trying to say for efficiency. Let's reset that. There we go. The next setting is the origin. Now, if you notice, I have my particles starting, and they're all spawning from this area right around here, right at his feet. And you can adjust where this area is, and you can also adjust the shape of this area. So for instance, right now I have set a sphere. It's at position 0, 0, 0, which is defined by the origin of my t-shirt, which is always at the floor. If I wanted to make this particle system looking like it's emitting from his shirt, I would basically move the Y position, which is your up axis. I think maybe about like 2 meters. And I think that should move the whole spawning of the particle system right here, right? There you go. I'm gonna move it back to the floor, just, and then you can also adjust the radius. Right now, the radius, the start of the radius is the center of the sphere, and the end is 1 meter out. So this invisible sphere here is 1 meter. I could do something like, I want the end to be like 0.1. So now all the particles are going to start to emit from a very, very, very small sphere. A much different effect, if you will. Go ahead and reset this. Now, direction works in conjunction with speed. The direction defines the direction in world space that the particles will start flowing based on the speed that you've provided. I can, if I want to, set a speed of 0. And when I do that, if you notice, the particles just start to emit, and then they get affected by gravity and fall to the floor. In fact, to show that a little bit better, and before we'll get to the gravity setting, but I'm just going to make gravity 0 as well. And when I do that, notice now the particles have no speed and no gravity, and so they just appear and disappear when your lifetime completes. Now, going back to the origin, you have a number of different shapes that you can have your origin be. One of my favorites is disk. So if you choose disk, position again starts at 0, 0, 0, but instead of it being a circular or a spherical shape, it's a flat disk. And I have my radius, let's make my radius, let's say 3 meters. So it's going to be a big disk around me. So if I press preview, notice all the particles are emitting as a flat disk. Now you can change this disk into something like a donut. So I can have my radius, so right now my radius is starting at 0, which is in the middle, out to 3 meters. But what if I say I want my radius to start at 2.9 to 3. So now my radius is going to start here and end here. So when my particles start emitting, now they start emitting in sort of a donut or a ring shape. And I can change the width of that, right? If I just go from 2 to 3, it's a little bit wider, right? There we go. Let me add a little bit of speed again. Oops. Just to get the particles to start flowing again. So there we go. Now we have our particles starting to flow again. Now you can have your particles start flowing in any direction, and that's where the normal comes in. Right now, my normal is going in the y direction, which is up, and that's why my particles are flowing upward. But if I were to say I want my particles to flow in the z direction, now they're going to start flowing on the z axis. Oh, I'm sorry. I totally need to back up. Specifically with a disc, the normal actually rotates this invisible disc in your origin, which is why you see it tilted on the z-axis. The normals are a little bit harder to understand, and if I can pause right here, one of the big future features that we're going to be introducing for particle systems is some visual aids, so that you can actually see the disk on the screen and you can make that invisible or not invisible. As well as speed and rotation and just a lot. Right now, you kind of have to imagine what those what these disks and origin points look like.
Yeah, that'll be a huge help.
It's going to be a huge help. Yeah. But let me go back to sphere here, just to give everyone a better example. We have a big sphere. Let's make the radius 0 to 1. There we go. Now we're back to a sphere again. And so I would encourage you to play with all of the with all of the different types of origins. Box is the same thing as a sphere, but just a box, and you can define the size of the box on the x and y and the z axis, and change the position of the box just like you can with a sphere. Now direction. This is my apologies. What I was a little bit confused about, because they both have this normal and position information. So direction. Notice I have my direction type as fixed, which means I am choosing for the direction of my particles to start flowing directly in the y-axis, which is straight up. And if I can do this example again, if I want to have my particles start flowing, moving in the z-axis, the positive z-axis, now you see the particles moving in that direction. And again, they will move at the speed that you set here. You can also, so this is direction. Each particle is moving in a straight line based on the normal. If I wanted these particles to move sort of at a 45-degree angle, maybe in this direction, I would choose 1, 1. These are normals, so they're expressed as vectors, so they're not in degrees. So if I have a vector y of 1 going up and a vector z of 1, the particles will average and start flowing in a 45-degree angle. So that's the way you have to play with this a little bit, but that's how you can get the particles to flow in a specific direction.
Yeah, it might be useful to point out too that y, as you mentioned, is up or straight up in the world space, but then x is a positive value of x runs off to your characters. Well, we're looking at their left side, so it would point to the right of the screen from what we're viewing, and then z is actually back away from the back of the character. as it is right now. Those are the world coordinates.
Right. No, good point, Drossel. So I'm going to show you a couple different ways that you can apply direction. You can also apply direction radially, which means, and it's much easier to just show you an example. All of the particles start flowing radially outward from the center at different speeds based on your speed. A cone. Cone is a tiny bit more complex. Let me set this up to give you an example, and then I'll show you why I did what I did. And let me move the speed up a little bit. Let's make it 5. And let me make the radius of the sphere, because I want these particles to start really tight. So I'm going to start 0.01. There we go. This gives you a really good example of a cone. And what I actually did here is I'm having the direction of the particles. They are moving in the y direction. And this position represents the top of an invisible cone. So think of the top of the cone at about 5 meters up, right around here. And then the radius is the radius of the cone. So how big I want this circle, right? And this is really good for creating fountains if you have your emission direction as a cone, because notice it's going out as a cone. Let me change the lifetime so you can just see them a little longer, right? See them emitting as a cone. If I make the radius wider, they'll start emitting in sort of a wider cone. There you go. Good example there of cone. You can also have random, which doesn't have anything to do with direction. It will just emit the particles randomly in all directions from the origin point. And then last but not least, point to particle. So you define, for point to particle is really interesting. You can define a position in space, and all the particles will start to flow in that direction. They will aim at the particle in space. So let's just say, let's just do a YZ of 3, 3. So I think it's going to be somewhere up here. And there you go. Notice all the particles are emitting, aiming at this arbitrary position in space that we've defined. And that's direction. Let me go back to cone. And let's make this 2, and I'll show you one of the last emission properties, and that's gravity. Right now, earlier in the topic, I moved gravity to 0 just to kind of get it out of the way for now, but you can apply gravity in the same way. World space, Y is either gravity up or gravity down. If I wanted to apply, let's say, a natural gravity to these particles that will be affected once they start emitting, I can, let's start with maybe -1, right? So that's gravity being applied downward force. Whoa, gravity's a little bit too heavy. So let me make that maybe -0.2. And notice they're just getting going, and then gravity's taking place and pulling them back down again. I can also solve that actually by just increasing the speed of my particle system. Now they'll have an initial speed. Oh, maybe a little bit too fast, but notice they are being affected by gravity and starting to come back down. You kind of have to play with speed and the weight of the gravity until you get an effect that you want. There we go.
Did I miss it, or did you do the fish?
I haven't done the fish yet. That's next.
Oh.
Let's see. Anything else about on gravity here? Okay. The last item in terms of gravity is, so you can either apply gravity as a direction, and that doesn't necessarily have to be up or down like normal gravity. You can have gravity be applied as a direction in the X or Z axis as well. So the last thing is gravity as a point. So in the same way as point to particle, you are picking an arbitrary position in space. So let me do the same thing here. Let me say 3 and 3. So there's an arbitrary position in space right around here, and then the scale of the gravity. And you can think of gravity as a point as like a planet in space, and all the particles will be attracted to that planet. So let me make the scale 3. I'm not sure how this is going to work yet, but let's find out.
Hey, can you zoom in a little bit? We have one person who's having a little bit of a hard time seeing when you rotate.
Oh yeah. Let me just get closer up like that. That's maybe a little bit better.
That looks good to me.
Let me make the scale 10. Oh, there you go. So notice there is a sort of a gravitational well right here. And all of these particles, depending on how close they get to that well, start rotating around it.
Can you rotate the view a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, maybe get behind the avatar. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Notice that the point in space is right there, and they're all starting to rotate around it. I don't have an example today. I wish I did, but I was playing around yesterday, and I was able to get the particles to start basically just like rotating around in a ring, almost like a field of asteroids around the ring around this point in space. This is a very, very powerful feature, and we're gonna keep working on it and tinkering with it and adding more attributes to this gravity well. We want to be able to make things like, swirling vortexes and things like that happen naturally. It'd be a lot of fun. But for now, let's go back to direction. So that's point to particle. Now, what Drosselmeyer has been poking me about this whole time, and let me just change the gravity to make the gravity a little bit less, just so we can see the particles a little better. Okay, now we have a big, nice spew of particles coming out here. So the next feature, and this is fairly new to Particle System 2.0, is the ability to change the color, the scale, and the rotation of a particle over time. And this is going to be very important to get the kind of effects that you want in terms of fire, to get particles to fade out before they die. And so I'm going to do a really quick example here for you. The first section is time. You can think of this, so for those of you in animation, as a timeline, and the timeline always goes from 0 to 1. And the reason this is not expressed in seconds is because this 0 to 1 time is dependent on the lifetime of the particle system that you have set here. And especially since the lifetime can be, a random value between these two values, we couldn't really set, our arbitrary time here. So you can almost think of this as from 0% of when the particle spawns to 100% when the particle finally dies. So I'm going to do something really simple here. You can add as many keyframes as you want. I'm going to add one more keyframe here to do the example that I want. It always puts it in the middle, and it always adds a timing here in the middle. So for me, from about, let's say, oops, no. Oh yeah, 0.8. From about 0.8 to 1, I want the particle system color to go from fully opaque to fully transparent. And so what you'll see is 80% of the life of the particle will be visible, and then from that 80% to 100%, you'll see the particle fade out. Let me make the life of the particles a little bit less, because it seems like they're existing a little bit too much here. Let's try that. 4 seconds. Notice you see the particles fading out as they get towards the end of their life. Right, now you can also do the same thing with color, and color is additive. So right now, I have white to white, so it's multiplying white times the red color of the material that I'm using. So let me just add, let's say, a green color here. So now the particle should go from red to red times green. And red times green looks like it's almost black. Let me do this just to make this example a little more clear. I'm going to use the opacity as my diffuse map as well, and that way we'll start out with white arrows.
Yeah, and that's more typical when you're using particles, because then you can use the color over a lifetime to affect the color of the particle.
Right, exactly. So if I wanted to, I could start with my particle system being blue and then move to green. And there you go. And then they still move to fully transparent towards the end of their life. Now you can do the same thing with scale over time. So let's say I want my particle system to grow by 3x. And then at the end of its life, I want it to go down to 0. So it's not only going to fade out, but they're going to scale down back to 0. Let's see what that looks like. Now there you see that the texture maps are growing, and then at the end of its life, they're going away forever. And then lastly, Drosselmeyer, this is what you've been waiting for.
Oh boy. Yay.
You can also do rotation. Now, rotation in this field is expressed in degrees. So 360 degrees, for example, is one full rotation. Oh, and note that was a happy accident. Notice they're going from 360 degrees back to 0 at the last part of this, which looks kind of cool. I wasn't expecting that, but I think I'm going to keep it.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. If I wanted my particles over the lifetime of the particle to rotate, let's say 2 times, I would just multiply this, right? So I would go 720 degrees. And if I wanted it to stay, I would just make sure that the last part of my keyframe matches. Now they should spin twice and then stop and fade out. 1, 2, and then fade out. Pretty fun. Now there is one more set of features hidden over here called Advanced, and we're not going to have time to go through these features in this demo, but I would encourage you to play around with these. You have random acceleration and random displacement. These are very powerful features, and you can get into a lot of trouble with them because your particle systems can go haywire. But just as a quick example, I'm going to turn on random displacement, and I'm just going to make the radius very slight. keep it in position. So what this is doing is it's actually displacing the origin of each particle every frame. And the kind of effect that you can get here, let me actually make it a little bit bigger, so you can really see what's going on.
Anton, we're about 5 minutes before the hour. We can go over a little bit for sure. We've just got some questions.
Okay, we've got a couple questions to answer to you live.
Okay, great. So just as a quick example, what if you can see here, they almost look like buzzing bees because they're being randomly displaced by 2 units every frame. So you get this really frantic buzzy kind of effect. This is something you definitely need to play around with. Random acceleration actually accelerates the particles in different directions. And that is in the advanced settings under evolution. I'm going to turn that off because that hurts my eyes. Now, the very last thing I'm going to share with you is the cell animation section. This works in much the same way as the examples that Greg was showing you earlier on, but it is in its own separate section. So if you want to apply cell animation material to a particle system, you have to use this section here, and you cannot use the cell animation section in the material inspector panel. It basically ignores this section because since this is a new particle system, it's a new engine, we had to have a separate section for the texture animation. But we did simplify it a little bit here, and I'm going to give you, I have an example already worked out here. I have my little Vcoin coins turning. And
that's great. You want to mention how you made that?
Yeah, definitely. So if I go over to the material that I'm using, and by the way, I don't think I mentioned, up here at the top, not only can you name your particle system, but you can actually choose which material in your material component that's the particle system is going to use. And you can do that right up here. And if you notice, I have a particle system here, material that I'm using. It's this one, and I'll go ahead and open this up. I actually did this in Photoshop. This is a 512 by 512. And Photoshop has a really interesting sort of pseudo 3D feature. So I took a flat image and I just started rotating it at even amount over 16 panels, or I should say 15 panels. That seems to be the way it worked out. So to apply this, notice the texture map is 4 by 4, and that's the way that you define it in the particle system. So it's 4 across by 4 down. So number of tiles 4 by 4, and my range of that particle system, I have right now I'm just using 7 of the tiles, so 0 to 7. The start and end range that you want, and that would be going across from left to right, starting at the top left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let me actually change this because I'm actually should be using 14 of them, or from 0 to 14, right?
Yeah, I think this was saved when we were playing with it before.
Yeah. Now notice the particles are spinning a lot more. So that brings me to the last animation setting, is the number of loops. I'm going to change this to 5 just to slow this down. And specifically what this means is the number of loops over that cell animation that the particle will affect over the lifetime of the particle system. So it's also dependent on how long that particle system is living. So right now it's doing 5 loops. If I just say 1 loop over the lifetime of the particle, you'll notice that it's going to go through that cell animation a lot slower. Tick, 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 tick. Might be a little bit hard to see in Zoom if you're not being able to see this at 30 frames per second.
And the other thing too is if you change the lifetime of your particle, it'll go even slower. Like if you make the lifetime longer, you'll have to adjust the loop.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because one loop over 2 seconds is definitely slower than one loop over 1 second. A little bit of math there. But anyways, this is a really interesting effect that you can get. This will become more important because pretty soon for some materials, we're going to start allowing 1024 by 1024 particles, or 1024 materials. And so you'll be able to have a little bit more richer particle systems if you wanted to do something like this with materials. This is actually at 512 by 512, that's actually still pretty good resolution.
Yeah, but it means you could do longer cell animations.
Yeah, you could do longer animations. So the last thing I just wanted to show you is to come back to my fairy sparkles here. And it combines a lot of the techniques that I was showing you earlier today, especially using world space. Again, I'm using an accessory so that it follows her hand. The particle system I'm using, I actually have it starting colored purple and then turning to white, and then eventually moving down to 0 scale and completely transparent. So you see the particles are able to kind of fade out very nicely. I have the lifetime of the particle set to 4. I have the size of my particles a little bit random, so they're a little bit different. And then the very last thing, in order to get this glow effect, a lot of you probably already know this, but especially if this is the material I'm using, my diffuse and my opacity is a shade of white or gray. And along with that, if you use additive blending, it sort of gives you a fake glow effect. If I was just to use composite blending here, notice, oops. Just real quick, I was actually wearing the particle system. There we go. So if you notice with composite blending, it's just cutting out the texture map. But if you use additive blend, you can get some nice glowing effects out of your particle systems. It's a really, really nice effect. And again, lastly, before I leave you guys, there's sort of the effect that you can get while having a particle system trail your animation in world space. And to conclude, this is not the end of particle systems. We have several updates coming soon. One is the ability to trigger particle systems with actions. That is not in this version yet. It's definitely something that we're going to try to get in, hopefully in the very next version. So in your action panel, in the next version, we'll probably do another tutorial and show everyone how to trigger, set up actions to trigger particle systems on or off. Other thing coming soon is, and this has been very, very highly requested even in the old client, and that's the ability to attach particles to accessories or to accessory bones. And that's going to be coming pretty soon too. We want you to have the ability to attach a particle to any bone, either whether it be a human bone or a human skeleton bone or an accessory bone structure that isn't necessarily our default bipedal structure. And then lastly, we're going to be adding tooltips, just as we did to the rest of the panels that you see. We're going to be adding tooltips pretty soon to all of the properties in the particle system. And that's all I got for everyone. I'm sure there's a lot of questions. I'm going to go ahead and leave this running because it's kind of mesmerizing. Unless Riggs, you want to take over the screen. And thank you, everybody.
Either way, it's fine. We can get mesmerized by your particle theory, or we can just put a Q&A. Let's just look at your particle theory for a while.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got a few questions, not too many. One of them, a couple of people asked, and they asked, when is this feature available? So particles is out, right?
That's right. That's right. If you update to the latest version, which is going to be 3.5.1, if you download a fresh version, you will get that version. And if you are already using IMVU Studio, you should see a little green update in the top right corner. And if you click that, then it should update you to the latest version. And you will see the particle component over in your far left, and you can start playing around with it.
Another question we have is, can you add multiple particle systems to your product?
Oh yeah, that's actually a great question. And the answer is yes. Notice I have a particle system here, but there's still a plus sign, so I can add as many particle systems as I want, and play with them all individually to get some compounding effects. If I preview that, notice right now I have some default particle systems, including the ones that already exists. So there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody was asking too, so they're asking about multiple particle systems, but also can you put it on any product? This is kind of related to what you were talking about before. But yeah, can you put it on any product?
Yes, you can add a particle system to any product. Again, for clothing products, the root of all clothing products are based on our male or female skeleton, and the root is going to always 0, 0, 0 is always going to be at sort of like the base of the skeleton. So it's a little bit something we have to work around right now until we come out with that future feature that's going to allow you to choose what bone you want the particle origin to be at.
Yeah, there was one case, I tried making a particle system from the empty furniture and noticed that didn't work because the empty furniture doesn't have any skeleton structure for it. That's correct. That's a current limitation.
Yeah, so there's a couple limitations there. Once we get past the having to be locked into the bipedal skeleton, that'll give us a lot more freedom.
Let's see, another question we have is will this appear on the client and desktop and mobile? Like where do our new particle systems appear?
The new particle systems are compatible with IMVU Desktop and IMVU Mobile right now. They're all compatible and they all work. If you build a product with a particle system in IMVU Studio, you can wear that product in the old classic client, but you won't see the new particle systems. It's a brand new particle engine, and so it's only compatible with our newer platforms.
I just wanted to interject with a reminder. If you're looking for a recording of this session, keep an eye out for the recording on the IMVU Studio homepage, which we've linked to in the chat. Also, keep an eye out on the discussion forums, the IMVU Studio discussion forums. There's a link in chat as well. And also, sorry, I have lost my train of thought. But anyway, keep an eye out for recordings in the discussion forums and the IMVU Studio homepage. And that's it for me.
I see a couple other questions here. I can take one or two of them if you like.
Yeah, the one I was looking at was about sort of performance of particle systems, I think is what the person's getting at. Sakul asked, does particle system texture need to be as low as possible or low to get less laggy? So I'm assuming they're looking to see, like, do I need to make really tiny textures, and is that more optimized?
Well, again, it's a big sliding scale. If for a particle system like this example, for instance, I know that my particles are going to be very tiny on the screen all the time. So I think this is just a 128 by 128 texture map that I'm using, and it's very, very effective. If I was doing something like the coins, the Vcoin, my little Vcoin fountain. Sorry, blatant advertising for Vcoin, everybody. If I was doing something like this, where I know that each individual particle itself is actually really big, I can go ahead and I'm using a 512 by 512 image, and it seems to be very, very performant, even on mobile. But if as part of my particle system product, I'm going to be adding, 10 particle systems here, you might start to see things get pretty slow if I'm using all 512 by 512 textures, because that's a lot of composite blending on top of like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of particles. So it's going to be something you're going to have to play with a little bit. I would definitely try to keep my particle systems very efficient. Because just like in every other part of creating products, you have to understand that the person wearing your product could be in a room with 10 other people, and those people could have particle systems as well. That being said, Particle System 2.0 is much, much, much more efficient and performant than the old particle system in the classic client. We're sort of using the latest technology and the latest APIs. And so we can get very, very performant before things start to lag in rooms. I hope that answered your question.
I think that's about it. One person asked something about small scalars, but I'm not, and they don't get it. Like, I don't know if they're talking about particles setting this. The question was, I type up small scalar, but I don't get it. And I'm wondering if they're talking about scalars or if it's about trying to make small particles, because I know there is sort of a limit on how small your particle can get. Is that correct?
While we were testing particle system, there was a limit at one point with how small it can get, but now you can get down to 0.001 of a meter, which is almost to the point where you can't see the particles anymore. I think if that's the question they were asking, you can just here. Let me give you an example here. For your initial particle size, which is
down a little bit.
Where is it? There we go.
There it is.
Yeah, just remember you can go down to, I think, 3 decimal places. Yeah, you can go down to 3 decimal places, 0.001 as a minimum size. So that's pretty small, right? If I were to do that, let's just do it because now I'm curious. Right, they're so small you can barely see them. I don't think I can see them. Yeah,
I can't see them at all.
Yeah. So yeah, there you go. If that's the question you were asking. If the question you were was asking about scalars, that's also another feature that we just released in 3.5.1, and we don't have time to go through it in this session, but it's right here for everybody. You can add a new scalar, and any part of your body you can add a scale amount to. And we're going to be doing a separate session on scalars because there's a little bit of complexity there. Some people know how to do it from the old classic client and the debug panel, but we've actually added a nice little user interface if you want to make your own scalars along with your products.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think that's about it. We're just about out of time, right, Grace?
Yeah. I think one last question from Dark Angel. Large file size cause issues for those on mobile. I think it's important to answer that question. Our mobile IMVU product is very, very performant, almost surprisingly so for the amount of polygons and pixels that it's pushing. That being said, iOS devices are much more performant than some Android devices, because iOS, because the operating system is much more controlled than on the Android side. Android devices, I mean, we have people statistically using Android devices from like 10 years ago. And products and rooms on those Android devices won't be that performant. But most people on modern devices aren't going to have a problem.
Great. All right. I think we are ready to say goodbye for now. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending.
Thank you all.
I'm fascinated by this myself. It's amazing new particle features. And thank you, Drosselmeyer and Tauntaun, for doing an awesome job as always.
Oh, our pleasure. I can't wait to see people creating new products in the catalog.
Me too. And we will see you next time. We'll definitely be doing another one of these IMVU Studio learning sessions in about a month. And again, feel free to look at the IMVU Studio homepage for past sessions that you can look at. And we look forward to seeing you very soon. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you all.